You know, it is absolutely amazing to see the teaching staff walking in here today. You know, I got up this morning, I was a little nervous. I said, how are we going to pull this off? Thank you for the feedback. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay, can you turn me up a little? I feel like I'm like a rock concert like Jay-Z and Beyonce. Can you turn me up? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Or maybe it's like an AT&T commercial. It's like, can you hear me now? Can you turn me up? Testing, testing. We did this before. Can you hear me now? All right, all right. First of all, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. It has been a long school year, but more importantly, a nice, hot, steamy summer. And apparently it's going to be a little bit steamier these next 3 days, right? So I just wanted to welcome you back, all of you. We have a lot to cover, but we will be brief because I know you want to get back to your classrooms. The first person I just want to thank, and this doesn't just happen overnight, it doesn't happen just because I say it happens. This setup has been going on for the past 3 days, if not into the last week. And that means that there were people here yesterday, over the weekend, to make sure that this took place. And I just want to publicly thank the custodians, Donna Grady. I don't know if she's here, but thank you, Donna. Thank you. And of course, I'm not easy to deal with, but she's very gracious in giving me constructive feedback when it comes to these things and making sure that things are timely. Stacy Hines, thank you. Thank you. Brianna Byastoff and the choral students are going to lead us in the national anthem. So at this time, I will have them come up and sing the national anthem for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to all of you. If I haven't said it 150 times, I'll say it again. I appreciate everything you do for all of our students. You are amazing. You are the first people on the front line, and I truly appreciate it. There are so many different things going on in this district, and this is my second year here in the district. Now, if you think about it, since there's been 3 different superintendents over the last 4 years, I feel like I'm a tenured superintendent here in the Nashua Public Schools. So I think I have a pretty good tenure going here, so that's pretty good. So I'm back. That's a nice thing. The second thing I wanted to say is that this job can be awesome, but at the same time, it is not done by myself. It's done by a team of people. I'm not going to justify or name every person here on the central office, but you'll get a chance to meet them at some point. I also wanted to just acknowledge individuals that are an extension of me that are very important, that at some point all of you will get a chance to interact with. First person is Dr. Garth McKinney, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Ed. Give a wave, Garth. Thank you. Donna Fitzpatrick, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary. Thank you. They are an extension of me. You'll get a chance to see them throughout the year, and certainly they do a great deal of work in the district. Again, I want to just publicly acknowledge the directors. Could you just please stand? I'm not going to read all the directors, but the directors at Central Office, please stand. There's more. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for everything you do. There are individuals who are much more talented than me. And when I say talented, they're more organized, they know more what's going on, they keep me focused. And so I would say that I am by far following this person's lead. She has been I'm a lefty, so I can actually say she's been my right-hand man, so to speak. So I can't do this job, not one day, and when she takes a day off, I start to get nervous and start to sweat because I don't know what to do at times, because I consider her probably a very valuable person in the office, and I could not and would not be able to do my job or anything else in my professional life without Tara Kinsella. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you. Where are you, Rosie? Where are you? Rosie. She's at Maine. Oh. All right. Rosie. Come back, Rosie. All right. Rosie was my administrative assistant. She's now at Maine Dunstable, and Kelly is very blessed to have her. So I miss you, Rosie. Board members, there are some board members here tonight. I want to publicly acknowledge Dottie O'Gara, board president, sitting over there. Gloria Timmons, board BOE. Susan Porter, BOE. Is there any, so I don't miss anyone, these are the 3 board members that I can see. Are there any other board members around? All right. No? Okay. All right, great. So, a couple things I just wanted to mention. We have some new individuals to the district. The first people I want to acknowledge are principals in the district. So if you are a principal in the district, please stand. Principals, please stand. Thank you. We have some new principals joining us. Richard Boardman of Mount Pleasant. Richard, stand. Where are you, Richard? Are you? All right. All right, thank you. Chaz Miller, Ledge Street principal. Helene Talbot, Lucero's principal. Amanda Sharoni, assistant principal, Mount Pleasant. Jason Lonigan, assistant principal, North. Michael Whitehead, assistant principal, North. We have some new people joining us in the central office. Jessica Wojak, assistant director of special ed. Masha Bagley, director of special ed. Chris will always be with us. We're not gonna, Chris Breams is retiring, but she was our former special education director, but I'm glad that she's still here, and thank you for being here. Danielle Alexander. Daniel. Daniel Alexander, Assistant Director of Special Ed. Chelsea Gillis, Preschool Coordinator. Deb Riley, Brentwood Program. Deb. Amanda Bastoni, CTE Director, Nashua North. Amanda started mid-year last year, but certainly she wasn't able to be introduced. And finally, I met this young man when I was campaigning for the superintendency, and he was probably a group of kids that I met here at the South. We had an instant connection, and I say that because anytime someone is bald, we're always connected one way or another. And so when he received the CTE director, I was very excited. What I also didn't know about Mike McQuilkin is that he was actually a Wheelock graduate of the same program that I attended. In fact, he was a member of the cohort before myself. So without further ado, Mike McQuilkin, CTE Director of the South. How many of you are first-year teachers? Let me just get some hands. First-year teachers? We don't have that many? Wow. How many of you are 35 years plus teaching? Raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you. 40 years. 40 years. Wow. Thank you. I feel like this is like a car accident. 40, 40, 41, 42, 43, 40. All right, so I'll do this. How about 43 plus? Wow, 1, 2, oh. All right. 50 years, 45. Here, keep your hand, 46. Oh, wow. Oh, we got 2. Wow. 40. All right. This will be my last pitch, and I have to move on. It's going to get hot in here. 48. Wow. Thank you. How many of you? 5 years? 5 years? That's about the majority of us. 5? No? No? 5 years teaching in the district? No? Okay. All right. Couple things. One of the things I wanted to publicly acknowledge too is that the work we do is in tandem with central office, is in tandem with the board, but there are some people that work behind the scenes. We have some good discussion. It's always good discussion, but in the end, we're always doing it for the team. And as I said, I couldn't do my job without the people that surround me. I also mean that there are people that aren't necessarily connected to central office, but they help me become better at what I do. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and really appreciate all the work that Adam Marcoux has done for the union and for the teachers. Thank you. I feel like I want to make sure I got everyone underneath the sun. So a couple of things. So I started off by saying, you know, kind of this will all be online, but this is more of a quick conversation, a year in review. What has happened a year later? It's kind of like, did we do the things we said we were going to do? And so part of what I've said is, what are some accomplishments we have and some of the challenges? And so part of what I said is, that we wanted to bring some stability to the district. And so I jokingly said, hey, listen, I'm back. We have assistants back, assistant superintendents back. But more importantly, I remember standing here and I remember saying that we need to do something that's going to move the district forward. And a couple of things have happened since then. Number one, we've got a 4-year contract for the teachers. I thank you for that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I want to thank all of the people who were involved in negotiations, both the leadership team, Tom Clausen, board members, the mayor, your team, our team, because I think that's so important for us. The second thing is that we have a 4-year contract for our principals as well and our assistant principals. And thank you for all you do for that. I appreciate it. We also have contracts for our paraeducators as well. And certainly that's important as well. So thank you for that. Part of what I have been most impressed with is that we've had some grant opportunities. And I would just like to publicly acknowledge the Cte program, particularly Donna Fitzpatrick and Amanda Pastoni, for all the work they've done for our Cte programs. This year, we secured some grants that are totaling about $20,000. We've also had some programs that are new to our Cte programs. And one of the things I was excited about when I read about them, but also excited about when we were talking about it, and for it to come to fruition is just a tremendous accomplishment. Particularly our drone program at the Cte at the North. And this is the first time that we're offering something like that in our Cte programs. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the work the Cte programs have done, but also bringing innovation to our schools. Thank you. The other thing that's been tremendous is, again, I want to thank the teachers in this room. Joe Manzoli. I want to particularly acknowledge the YMCA. I want to, Bob Chopra, all of our teachers here as well, because this is the first time we started a Power Scholar program for our kids here in the district. It was a summer school program designed for our at-risk students, our students in our Title I schools. And this is something that was new in a way that we offered it at the elementary school and at the middle school. And more importantly, this was the first time in such a program could offer swimming for our kids. Now, you think swimming is something that we take for granted, but all of our kids had an academic, social and emotional experience during this year, and I really want to acknowledge that publicly through the partnership with the Y and all the work that all of you have done in this room. And I know that some of you work in these programs, and I wanted to say thank you for bringing something different to our schools. Thank you. Can I talk budget? Can I talk budget? So, one of the things I was committed to, and I say this with all of my heart, I say this with all deepest appreciation. I'm so happy, and I'm so happy that not one of you had to worry about your job. I'm so happy that we had to put an end to what I would consider the Hunger Games at the board meetings when it comes to the budget. And I want to publicly acknowledge the work that the board has done. The board has, put forth a 3.4 budget. We didn't get that. I understand that. But we also got a 2.5 budget increase from the mayor's office. And what that allowed us to do is it didn't put any of you in competition with each other. You didn't have to worry about coming to a board meeting to say, keep my job, cut this job. And from my heart and I know we appreciated that there were no surprises. When we had to make budget reductions, we weren't cutting people who were already employed. And I just want to say that it's your work, the mayor's work, the aldermen, all of these individuals that are playing a role allowed us to what we call roll over the budget and retain our current teaching staff. They were also very supportive of our contracts. They were also very supportive of our principal contracts as well. And I also wanted to say thank you. And the goal as superintendent is to continue to advocate for what we need is to continue to advocate for what this district deserves and put the kids first. And that's going to be my focus moving forward now and for the rest of my tenure. But I wanted to publicly acknowledge that this has been a tremendous year because I sense that perhaps there's a little bit of peace that you know that you didn't have to storm the board meeting to advocate for your job. And I thank you for all the support coming from the city, the aldermen, and from the board. All right. So, finally, I would say again, I want to focus on our CTE programs. 3 years, the machines in these CTE programs have remained dormant. This year, love it. I think it was a little catchphrase I'm pointing, sorry to point, Donna. Donna or Amanda came up with. They said, turn the machines on. A year in review. 3 years these machines have been off. This year they're going to be turned on. It's amazing. And the work's going to continue. And thank you for that. Yeah. So I was trying to find, like, how many of you watch Netflix? Watch Netflix? I love Netflix. I love Netflix because I can like carry it in my wallet, in my pocket here. I just absolutely love Netflix. And so those of you who don't know me that well, I'm a Netflix junkie. I just watch it every morning in the gym. Sue and I give a wink and a nod when we work. I'm not working out with Sue, but well, I see a couple of teachers at the gym, but I watch Netflix all the time. So I was trying to make some connections, like how do you do Netflix? I started watching this little series called The Innocent, but then that didn't work out. So I was trying to come up with some different phrases to connect Netflix to this experience. I'm looking at the room, and I don't see if people are, no one watched cable, Netflix, yes? Okay, Netflix, Ozark, no? Okay, anything like that? I'm not saying I watch that, my friend watches that. So then I came across this nice quote. I was watching this series, it's in Spanish, and it said something like this: "Normalcy is a paved road. It's comfortable to walk, but no flowers grow on it." And it's a quote by Vincent van Gogh, and that's how the series opens up. And so with that said, how do we grow flowers? How as a district we move forward? And so I will leave you with this. Moving forward is going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take some sacrifice. It's going to take some early mornings and long nights. And I know all of you do that every day with your kids. I know you do it as professionals. And I know that it's not easy. I also know that, and I experience it personally, that every morning that you're up with our kids, and I appreciate that. So with that said, I just wanted to let you know that we may have some difficult days in front of us. It may seem like we're not moving ahead, but with this district is definitely moving ahead on so many different initiatives that it's just amazing. With that said, I would say that for myself personally, this district, I'm going to continue to advocate for our paraprofessionals we need in our full-day kindergarten. I'm going to continue to thank you. Thank you. The thing that's in my claw is our ELL students. I believe that these students have not had the attention focus on them in terms of staffing. No one's fault. No, I'm not blaming anyone in this room. But our ELL students are the ones that really need us the most, and I will continue to advocate for those young men. Thank you. Finally, I will say this, that I have enjoyed my time here in the schools as the superintendent. I get to know all of the buildings in a different way because as a parent of now, I want to say 2 high schoolers and 1 middle schooler, I've had an opportunity to experience the district as a parent, as a community member, and all I hear is nothing but good things. There are great things happening here for our kids. So, I would leave you with this. I want you to have a great year. I want you to stay positive. I want you to know that you'll never be alone. This isn't about me. It's always been about we. And I thank you for everything that you do for our kids. I thank you for everything that you do for our schools and our community. And we're going to have a good year. Thank you. I was I was in a rush this morning, so I had this printout of our speaker today, of Mike Anderson. But I was in the midst of walking my dog and leaving the house. So I actually left my sheet that I had from Mike at my house. So I had to take out my phone. I texted it to myself, so that's why I took out my phone. So I'm reading Mike Anderson's bio. Mike Anderson has been in education for over 20 years now. Mike has done and performed many professional developments around curriculum, social-emotional learning, and differentiated learning. He's written several books, but just to name a few, What Every Teacher Needs and The First 6 Days of School. Mike has extensive experience in social-emotional learning for our kids. He has been a consultant for quite some time. We appreciate Mike's words. He's actually inspiring. I asked him to come and speak to us today to welcome us back, and more importantly, to help our kids and to help us become better professionals. With that said, I give you Mr. Mike Anderson.
Thank you very much. Hey, can I get the clicker? Good morning, everyone. How's the sound? Is it okay? It was working fine when none of you were here earlier. So I was wondering how it would work when all the bodies were in the room. So Dr. Mosley, Jamal, thank you so much for that nice introduction. Let me kind of fill in a little bit about my intro, just so you know a little bit more about me. I consider myself a classroom teacher who happens to be doing education consulting work and authoring books. I was a classroom teacher for 15 years in public schools. So I taught for 6 years in East Lyme, Connecticut, which is down in the southeast corner, kind of near Mystic and New London. And then I taught in Portsmouth, New Hampshire for 9 years. I taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, kind of bouncing around from year to year. I've also worked in a preschool program. When I was in college, we had a lab preschool program, and I was able to work there all 4 years I was in college. I've taught graduate level classes at the University of New Hampshire. So I've really had an opportunity to work in a lot of different settings, which has been fantastic. And I am so excited to be here this morning to wish you all a Happy New Year. I think this is one of the few professions where we actually get this amazing restart. End of August, beginning of September, it's like we get a fresh beginning, and we have an opportunity to craft our teaching anew, and I think that's an incredible, incredible thing. And so I'm here to share a couple of ideas with you this morning that I think will be kind of a nice kickstart for the year. There are kind of some big ideas that I want to push people to think about, and then I also have some practical strategies for you to go out and try right away. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of Benna Kalick. She is also an educator, a lifetime educator. She and Art Costa came up with the Habits of Mind framework. So I had a chance to meet Benna recently at a conference, and she was talking about the importance of not overloading people with information. She said, you know, Mike, if you give people too much to think about and not enough time to digest it, people get cognitive indigestion. So I'm going to work hard at not giving you cognitive indigestion this morning, which means that I'm going to give you a few things to think about, and then you're actually going to get to turn and talk with 1 or 2 people nearby and digest a little bit. Think a little bit about what I've said, maybe I'll answer a question. So in order to get us back together, I'm going to use ye old hand signal. I bet a lot of you use this in your classrooms or in your schools. So when you've been talking and it's time for us to come back together, I'm just simply going to put my hand up. And that's going to mean it's time to wrap up conversations fairly briefly and bring your attention back down here. You don't have to put your hand up with me, although it would help if some of you did, because that'll cue in everybody else that we're coming back together. So we'll go ahead and use that as a strategy this morning to give you a chance to think and talk together a little bit, and then to be able to come back together. All right, so my overall topic this morning, I don't think is going to come as a huge earth-shaking idea to anybody. The basic idea of this talk is that the world is changing. It's not surprising to hear this. How many of you, just by a show of hands, have noticed that kids coming to school today are different than kids were 10 years ago? Okay, so this is not big news. Kids are being raised differently. Certainly, the fact that kids are, having access to devices at a very early age is changing the way kids grow and develop. Family structures are changing and growing and developing. And I'm not necessarily saying that any of this is either good or bad. There's probably a mixed bag there. But I think it's just important that we recognize that our children are changing. That means that if we're trying to teach kids who are coming into school today with the exact same structures and strategies that seemed to work 10 or 20 years ago, we can probably predict that it's not always going to be successful. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember at the beginning of the year. There are other ways that the world is changing. The world of work is changing. Here's an interesting statistic I heard just recently. Would you believe that 10% of the US workforce already, right now today, is comprised of freelancers and contractors? 10% of the US workforce are already engaged in working for themselves. And when I first heard that, I kind of went back to my Auburn, Maine, 4th grade self, and I went, nuh-uh, no sir, can't be. But then I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm one of those people, because I'm working as an independent education consultant. I've started an LLC, I'm a company of one. My wife is one of those people. She's also a former classroom teacher who now teaches knitting. She teaches 7 classes a week in both Dover and Durham. We live in Durham. Her brother, Steve, is a website designer and developer. So he lives in a house in Durango, Colorado, but he works for companies all over the place doing website design work. And his wife is a freelance editor. And as I thought about that and thought of some other people I knew who worked for themselves, I thought, okay, maybe 10% is not so far off. So here's another crazy stat. Some economists are estimating that within 10 years, 50% of the US workforce could be working for themselves. No longer working for organizations and for companies. Now, traditionally, in US schools, which you all know were modeled on the factory system of the industrial age, right? We know that's the system we've inherited. Typically, the way to be good at school as a kid is to be really, really good at doing what other people tell you to do. If you're compliant, if you're obedient, if you do what teachers say in the way in which teachers say to do it, then typically you're successful in schools. And so if our goal was to raise generations of kids who are really good at doing what other people say, I'd say we're probably overall doing a pretty good job. However, what if half the workforce aren't going to be working for other people? What if half the workforce are actually going to be working for themselves? If they need to be managed and motivated by other people, they might be in a lot of trouble. Additionally, even the people who are working for companies, who are working for businesses, the skills of compliance and obedience are no longer at the top of the list of what employers are looking for. A buddy of mine works in the tech sector. He's in a company on the south side of Boston. And he said one of his greatest frustrations with the people that he manages is the people who come to him always asking, is the work good enough? I'm reminded of my 4th graders who used to come up to me with their pieces of work saying, hey, Mr. A, do you like it? Hey, Mr. A, is it good enough? So when people go into the workforce and what they're trying to do is sort of do whatever their bosses or managers tell them to do, those are actually not the people who are most successful. When you look at the lists of skills that employers are looking for in employees, it's about creativity, collaboration, empathy, creative problem solving, being able to work with challenging people. Those are the transferable skills. that all people are going to need. And especially as automation and outsourcing continue to shift our job market, as a lot of those sort of rote linear jobs disappear, it's going to be more and more important that all kids get a chance to experience and practice the skills of relationship building and empathy and collaboration. Another way the world is changing is that content itself is shifting. When I turned 40, 7 years ago, my nephew gave me a t-shirt that said, "When I was your age, Pluto was a planet." I remember when I was a kid being taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America. It wasn't until I grew up that I thought, wait a minute, how do you discover a place if there are already people living there? We learn new things all the time. Content shifts and changes. There is more content now than there ever has been before. I forget the statistic. You've probably heard it. It's something like the amount of information in our world doubles every 8 years, and it may even be faster than that. That's why this is called the information age. So there's more information ever before, and we all have access to more information than anybody has ever had before. You all have in your pockets and in your purses devices that allow you to look up core content if you need to know it. How many years did I teach American history as a 5th grade teacher? I still can't tell you when the Boston Tea Party was. I know it happened, a few years before the Revolution, 72, 73, somewhere in there. But if I need to know it, I can just ask my phone. So one of the things I think we need to consider as we think about the world is changing and so should school is, what are the main goals of a good, strong education? I think there's some shifts we need to consider, and I don't believe that what we need to do is flip schools upside down, shake it out, and start all over again. I think we've got an incredibly good structure and a great beginning already, but there are some things we might consider. Do all kids need to know the exact same vocabulary words? Does everybody need to know who Max Planck was? Does every kid need to read The Red Badge of Courage? So one of the things we're going to talk about a couple of ideas now this morning, and a couple of practical strategies that we can use to shift what we've got and make it more resonant and applicable for kids as they're moving into this new age. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of big ideas. Before we do that, I'm worried you're going to get cognitive indigestion if I go too much further. So we're going to do about a 1-minute partner chat, about 60 seconds, to turn to 1 or 2 people nearby and just share a little of your thinking about what I've shared about how the world is changing. Go ahead. All right. By a show of hands, how many of you want your students to be self-motivated? All right, if you did not just put your hand up, the rest of us are silently judging you right now. Of course we want our kids to be self-motivated. We want our kids to have energy coming from within. We want them to tackle their schoolwork with passion and ownership. And self-motivation is one of those key transferable skills that they're going to need whether they work for somebody else or whether they work for themselves. And it's one of those skills that's going to help them be successful in the world of work after school. So one of the things that I think we should do is we should stop trying to motivate kids. Because when it's our job to motivate kids, where's the self-motivation? And one of the things that schools have done really well for a long time is create systems to motivate kids. In elementary schools, we do things like give kids stickers for doing a good job. Or we give them lots of sort of teacher-pleasing praise for doing good work. As kids get older in middle schools and high schools, we give them grades to motivate them. Study after study after study has shown that these kinds of motivators actually decrease intrinsic motivation in the long run. They may motivate in the moment, but when we tell kids, if you do lots of reading over the summer, you'll get pizza certificates, they might read more that summer, although probably if they're getting certificates for every book they read, if they've got any brains at all, they're reading the shortest books they can. So already we can see a flaw in that system. But the studies show that although they might read more books in the summer, their joy and love of reading will decrease over time. So one of the things that we need to do is work at tapping into self-motivation. So up on the screen, you'll see some of the key intrinsic motivators that we are all born with. And these are the kinds of things that we can work at nurturing in our classroom teaching. To foster a sense of belonging, we can make sure all kids know each other's names, and we can help them feel like a part of a team. One activity I did once, as I was struggling with a scripted math program in my own teaching, which sort of beat the joy and love out of learning math. So I often veered away from that program. So we were supposed to work on prime factorizations. And I looked in the workbook that we had, and I thought, oh my gosh, this just does not look like it's going to be a whole lot of fun. We've got to do something different. So we wrote all of the numbers, 1 through 100, up on a dry erase board in our classroom. And our team challenge as a group of 5th graders was to see if we could come up with the prime factorization for every number 1 through 100. And so for 40 minutes, students were working together. They'd go up when they finished one, they'd write it on the board, they'd go and get another number, and they'd work on that, and they'd write it on the board. We all practiced working on prime factorizations through this collaborative team challenge. And they felt this sense of connection and belonging with each other as they did this cool work. And oh my gosh, it was so much more fun than what that workbook page, was going to have us do. We can work at building in a sense of purpose into daily work. Instead of kids turning in a piece of writing to simply get scored on a rubric or be given a grade and then have the paper turned back, what if instead kids were engaged in publishing writing to a blog, or writing letters to the local newspaper, or creating anthologies in the classroom? One of my favorite things to do as a classroom teacher was to have us all write poetry or write cool science fiction and fantasy stories and then put them all together into a class book that we could then share with families. That gave the work a real sense of purpose. Now we're just not writing to sort of meet an assignment, but we're writing to share it with other people. We can work at tapping into a sense of mastery. It feels good to see yourself growing and learning. So what if instead of us being the ones to create the rubrics and us being the ones to always do the assessing of learning in the rooms, what if kids had an opportunity to co-create rubrics with us? What if they were setting goals and saying, here's what I want to learn, here's a challenge I want to put forward for myself, and then doing more self-assessing? This kind of thing taps into kids' innate desire to grow and learn. We should also just make sure that the work itself is fun. It's always important, I think, for us to put ourselves on the other side of the classroom when we're coming up with an assignment or we're about to do a piece of work and say, if I were a 12-year-old on the other side of this equation, would I want to do this work that we're about to do? I remember once I was working with a group of 3rd grade teachers in Western Massachusetts, and they were complaining that their kids were squirrely. And I said, squirrely? What do you mean squirrely? And they said, well, they just can't sit still. They're looking out the window, they're poking each other, they're talking all the time. And I thought, okay, they sound 8. And I said, well, tell me more about that. And one of them said, look, I can put them right here at this round table, and I could just have 5 of them. And I'm trying to do a math lesson with them, and they can't even listen to me, they can't even pay attention. And so my question was, well, is that work that you're talking about fun? And she said, well, it's the next lesson in the math program. I said, right, but if you were an 8-year-old on the other side of the table, would you want to do that work? And she looked at me with this kind of confused expression, and she said, but Mike, it's the next lesson in the math program. I think we may be in trouble if we forget to see the schoolwork that our kids are doing from their perspectives. So a challenge I have for all of you is to think about the work kids are doing and to answer that question, would you want to do it? And then finally, we can tap into a sense of autonomy. When we allow kids to choose some of what they learn and how they learn it, when we give them some control and ownership of the work, it's amazing what can happen. So let me tell you a short story about a time when many of these factors came together in my own room, and then you're going to get a chance to share and talk with somebody else about a piece of work you do with kids that's super awesome. So in our 5th grade class in Portsmouth, we were studying conflict in U.S. history. And the way we were doing this was that kids had a chance to study something they cared about. Every kid took on an independent research project, and they were learning about people or events from conflict in U.S. history and putting together independent research projects. And so they were excited about the projects. They were going to be sharing these with other people. And I remember it was a Friday morning, and Timmy from my class came up to me about midday, and he said, Mr. Anderson, are you going to be here tomorrow? I said, well, tomorrow? You know it's Friday. You mean, am I going to be here at school on Saturday? And he said, well, yeah, I know that sometimes you come into school on the weekends. Are you going to be here tomorrow? This was before I had kids. So I did go to school a lot on the weekends. And I said, well, I wasn't planning on it, but I got work to do. Yeah, I guess I could come in. Why? He said, because this model of Little Round Top is taking so much longer than I thought, and I really need to work on it. We're doing presentations next week. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, I'll come in. How about I'll be in from 8 to 12, and if you want to come in and get some work done on your project, you can do that. He was like, oh, thanks, Mr. A. A kid nearby says, whoa, wait a minute. Timmy's coming in tomorrow? And I said, yeah, he needs to do work on his social studies project. He said, well, I got a lot of work to do. Can I come in tomorrow too? So I said to my class, all right, everybody, I'll be here from 8 to 12. If you want to come in tomorrow to do some extra work on your research projects, you can come on in. Just have your parents drop you off at the door in the back of the room. 11 kids showed up on a Saturday morning to work on their conflict and U.S. history research projects with bewildered parents opening the car door saying, Emily said she can come in. Are you sure this is okay? How cool is that? This was, by the way, a non-graded assignment, just in case you were wondering. So let's do another turn and talk. What's an example of a piece of awesome work that your kids get to do that you can't wait to facilitate with your students, and maybe something that taps into one of these intrinsic motivators? All right, a couple of more thoughts to throw your way, and then we'll head on out, because I'm sure if I were in your shoes right now, I would be enjoying this, clearly, but also really eager to get back and get going in classrooms and schoolwork. And so let me just share a couple of more ideas, and then we'll go ahead and break. So a part of all this great work that we need to do, and it goes hand in hand with great academic teaching, is we have to remember the importance of relationships, that relationships matter. It's really hard for good learning to happen in the absence of relationship. Many high school teachers have probably heard the adage, kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I was sort of going through this talk last night, and my daughter was looking over my shoulder. She's 15, she's gonna be a sophomore. And she looked at that, she's like, what does that mean? And I explained it, and she nodded, like, oh yeah. It's the teachers that kids connect with who they learn the most from. And so at the beginning of the year, we want to remember to learn kids' names early and use their names often. Make sure we're pronouncing names correctly. When I had students in my class who were Vietnamese, or students who had names that I wasn't familiar with, they would often try and say, oh, it's okay, Mr. A, if you don't quite pronounce my name correctly. And I would say, no, it's not. No, pronouncing names correctly is incredibly important. We need to take time to get to know our students beyond just their academic capabilities. Don Graves, who was one of the grandfathers of the writing process, used to have a great activity he would do, and I've done this a few times in schools, and it's really interesting. Once you get a month into the school year, try this. If you're an elementary school teacher or a self-contained teacher, you might do it with your whole class. If you're a special area teacher or a middle or high school teacher, you might do it with one group of students. So here's what you do. Without looking at a class list, you write all of the kids' names in a class down the left side of a piece of paper, in the order in which you think of them. Just that is interesting. You know, which students are always right at the top of our minds? And which ones do we struggle to remember? Then, next to each name, write down one thing you know about each kid that doesn't have anything to do with academics. Maybe they like horses. Maybe they live with their grandmother on the weekend. Maybe they moved here from Massachusetts last year, whatever. Then, next to that, you put a check mark next to that piece of information if you have talked with that child about that piece of information in the last couple of weeks. It's a great activity to help us recognize not only how well do we know our students, but how well do they know that we know them? Because it's when they know that we know them that the real power happens. I also think part of building relationships with kids and with facilitating great academic work is that we've got to love the characteristics of the ages we teach. I live in Durham, right next to the university, and there's a small apartment building next door to us, and we were having a picnic a couple of years ago, sort of to help the college kids understand they lived in a family neighborhood, you know? And so we were meeting and greeting, and there was this one kid who was sitting at the table, and I was talking with him, and I said, so what are you thinking about doing? And he's a sophomore, you know, so he's still figuring it out. He's like, you know, I think I want to be a high school math teacher. And I said, oh my gosh, that's awesome. I'm an educator. You must really love working with teenagers. And his face, I think that he thought that as a high school math teacher, he was going to work with math all day and hadn't realized he was actually going to be working with teenagers all day. So if you work with teenagers and adolescents, you've got to enjoy the sort of angst and struggle of adolescence. The fact that they can be like little kids one minute and adults the next minute, and then be back to little kids again a few minutes later. I've got 2 teenagers in my house. I'm living that insanity right now and loving it. As an elementary school teacher, I used to love how sort of fiercely passionate about justice 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders could be. They could get so fired up about things, and sometimes they were things that I thought that we shouldn't spend time on, you know, like who was first in the lunch line. And of course, I said ridiculous things to 9-year-olds like, it doesn't matter where you are in line, we're all going to the same place anyway. But if you're 9, it really matters. where you are in line. So you gotta love that energy. When I worked in a preschool classroom, I learned to love the spontaneity of young children. How you just never knew what was gonna happen next. There was this one boy in the preschool class I worked in who every morning walked in, and you could see it was how his dad came home from work. His dad was a construction worker. John would walk over, he'd take off his boots, he'd hang up his jean jacket, he'd walk right to the dramatic play area, he'd open up the fridge, take out a bottle of milk, and go, psst, ah, a cold beer. Every morning. And I remember, oh my gosh, one of my favorite stories from that class, there was this little girl who came up to the head teacher, and the teacher was kind of a germaphobe, which makes the story even better. Came up to the teacher and tugged in her pant leg and said, "Miss Isberg, I have to use the bathroom." And Nancy, the teacher, said, "Okay, Janine, well, you're a big girl, you're 3, you can go by yourself." So Janine says, "Okay." So she totters off to the bathroom. She's in there for about 10 minutes. And the teacher signals to me that she's going to go check and see what's going on. So she goes and looks over the half door, down in. And Janine is sitting in the toilet, naked. All of her clothes are in a little bowl next to the toilet. And the teacher says, "Janine, what are you doing?" And Janine says in this very matter-of-fact voice, like this is no big deal. She's like, "I have to poop, Miss Isberg." Like, doesn't everybody poop in the nude? And so Nancy said, "Okay, well, when you're done, put your clothes back on and come back out and join us in the room." Janine said, "Okay." 10 more minutes go by. And she's still in there, so Nancy motions. She's going to go check. So she goes and looks over the door. Janine is still naked. All the clothes are still next to the toilet. And she's bending over with toilet paper in her hand, bending over to pick up the poop, which is on the floor. So Nancy says, "Janine, what happened?" And Janine, in a very matter-of-fact voice, again, like this must happen all the time, she said, "Well, Miss Isberg, I was sitting in the toilet waiting for the poop to come out, and I was biting my toenails, and it came out onto the floor, and now I'm going to pick it up." I mean, if you can't enjoy that sort of thing, you probably shouldn't be teaching preschool. So let me just share one more idea and one more story, and then we'll head out. And it's part of this idea of building relationships with kids and loving the kids we've got. Can we all just be honest with ourselves for a moment and acknowledge that some children are easier to like and love than others? There are some kids who walk through our doors every morning and they make us feel good about ourselves. They smile, they use our names, they tell us about themselves, they ask how we're doing. And there are other kids who walk in prickly. In case you can't see from where you are, that's a picture of a porcupine up there. And you've probably heard of this idea of hugging porcupines. So one of the things I want us to remember is that we need to make sure that we practice hugging porcupines. Because the kids who are the most prickly, the kids who are the ones who are hardest to like and love, those are the kids who most need our love. They most need the opportunity to build relationships that are healthy and positive with adults, because they're often the kids who aren't getting the chance to do that outside of school. On a daily basis, some of our kids see really bad adult behavior modeled for them. Aggression, detachment, and worse. And we've got to remember that these students do not choose to come to us as porcupines. I think about some of my own kids. Bobby did not choose to live in a family where if one kid came home late, all 6 kids got lined up in the living room for the belt line. He didn't choose that. Melanie did not choose to be born to a 16-year-old mother who could barely even take care of herself, let alone her and her younger brother. Jamie did not choose to have his mother die of cancer when he was young and to be left with a father who was a grown-up adolescent who sat around playing video games all night and didn't cook dinner. And Alec certainly did not choose to have a mother who pushed him out of a moving car when he was 5 years old in Prescott Park, who was in and out of prison because of drugs. Alec did not choose to only live with an adult for no more than 10 months at a time for his entire life by the time I got him in 5th grade. These are the kids who need us the most. And it can be hard to hug porcupines. It means we're going to get hurt sometimes. They need a chance to see adults at their best. They've got plenty of adults in their world who are treating them poorly. They need us to be strong and loving and caring and supportive, even when it feels like they might not deserve it because of the way that they're melting down in front of us. So I want to finish today by telling you a story of a porcupine I worked really hard at hugging for an entire 5th grade year. And he's actually one of those few kids who I heard from years later. So John came to me as kind of a mess in October of 5th grade. He was moving from California. He'd been in a classroom where all the kids had been sitting in rows in alphabetical order. He struggled with weight, and he had been bribed with candy and McDonald's food when he was in school. That was how they got him to behave. His family was falling apart. His mother had left his father, and on the way out had said, the father was a truck driver and had been gone a lot. She said, "I can't take him anymore," pointing at her son. "I raised him for the first 9 years, you raise him for the next 9. And I know this because the first time I met the dad just sobbed for 45 minutes about losing his soulmate. I just handed him tissues. His giant, truck driver with tattoos and a big beard, just crying and crying. So I'll never forget, John came into my room on that first day, and I had a reading loft and a couch, and we had pet snakes, and there were tropical plants, and he's coming from a classroom that did not look anything like this. He walks into my room, and this is how he walks in. "Dude, this room is weird." He was hard. For the first couple of weeks, he basically just sat and watched. I let him observe morning meeting instead of joining in, just to let him get his feet under him. But when it was time to go out onto the playground to do artist-writers workshop, we were doing this combined science poetry unit where we were observing nature and writing poetry. He was faking asthma attacks on the way out because he was terrified of writing. He knew how low he was as a writer. And so we'd be walking out and he'd go, "Mr. Anderson, I'm having an asthma attack." Well, what do? Call him on his bluff and then, so I'd say, "John, go to the nurse." Twice early in the year, he came to me with blood trickling out of his hand and a pencil tip stuck in his hand to say, Mr. Anderson, I gotta go to the nurse. I didn't do this on purpose to get out of math." He would sit 5 feet away from the pencils, where the pencils were in the room, and bellow, "Mr. Anderson, I need a pencil." But the most dramatic day happened when we were going to go hike Mount Major. I didn't have enough school personnel to be able to have a one-on-one with John if he had an asthma attack halfway up Mount Major, and I couldn't let this one guy make it so that the whole field trip stopped. So I called up John's dad and I said to John Sr., "John's not going to be able to go on the field trip with us. Too out of control right now, we just can't take him. But I've got a great classroom for him to be in. I don't want him to get out of school. He still needs to know he still comes to school. So I've got a packet of work for him. I've got a great room he's going to be taken care of. Bring him on in." And John Sr. said, "Okay." So the morning of the field trip comes along and John Sr. walks in. "John's sick. He needs to stay home today. Can I have the work?" And I thought, oh, but there's only so much you can do. So I was going through the work with him. Who walks in through the door? John, not sick, in sweatpants. "Come on, Dad, what's taking you so long?" John Sr. said, "I told you to wait in the truck. Get back in that truck." So John rolls his eyes and walks back out. A couple of minutes later, we get a call from the intercom in my room. "Mr. Anderson, there's a boy in here crying hysterically and asking for you." John Sr. stands up like this. I said, No, John, cool your jets for a minute. Let me see what's going on. Let me see if I can take care of this." So I walked down to the office. John is sobbing in the office. So he went back out to his dad's pickup truck, as his dad told him to do. His unemployed dad's uninsured pickup truck. Noticed that the parking job was a little off. It's kind of cockeyed in the space. So John slid into the driver's seat, put the keys in the ignition, turned the truck on, put it in reverse, and did $5,000 damage to the district librarian's car, who was not showing her best self in that moment and was having kind of a meltdown in the parking lot herself. John, in the office, hears the principal calling the police. He thinks he's going to jail. John Sr. walks back into the office, hears what's happened, says, "That's it, I can't take it anymore, I'm sending you back to your mother in California." So now his mother doesn't want him and his father doesn't want him. Middle of that year, John Sr. came to me crying again. It was about January. He said, "Mike, we're having to leave the apartment. My mother's he was living with his mother in the apartment. He said, my mother's about to be evicted because of John's behavior. We got to get out so she can keep her apartment. I've got a place in Somersworth, but I don't want him to leave you. He's finally feeling safe here. He's finally starting to make friends." And I said, "Well, can you get him here?" And he said, "Yeah, I can still drive him here, but I don't want him to leave your school." I said, "Well, district policy says that as long as you're actively looking for housing in Portsmouth, John can stay here if you can get him here while you're looking for housing." He said, "Mike, come on, you know I can't afford anything in Portsmouth." I said, "As long as you tell me that you're actively looking for housing in Portsmouth, John can stay here." He said, "I'm actively looking for housing in Portsmouth." I said, "Well, thank heaven, because I wouldn't want to lose John. We've come so far." So I always wondered, what happened to this guy? John's one of those students who you just think about forever. And I'd always wonder, whatever happened to him? 2 years ago, I got an email. You ready for this? "Dear Mr. Anderson, my name is John Hall. I was in your 5th grade class, 2000-2001. He gave me permission to share this letter, by the way. "I just wanted to let you know how much of a positive impact in my life you made. When I came to your class, I had just moved cross-country from California with my dad. I had been a part of my parents' brutal divorce, was riddled with behavioral and abandonment issues, and I needed serious stability. I found that in your classroom, sir. I made friends and learned lots of valuable life lessons I've used to grow into a successful young man. From your class, I went on to 6th and 7th grade in Somersworth, New Hampshire. From there, I finished my education in Farmington, New Hampshire, where I graduated in 2009. In 2010, I moved back to California and went to college. After going to a 2-year school, I tested the waters of being a working class man. I lasted a year before I decided to go to barber school in 2013. I've been barbering since. I'm 25 now. I have a wife, a barber license, and a house in suburban Los Angeles. Everything is just great. Thank you for not giving up on me that year, sir. I just needed some guidance and care. I hope all is well with you, sir. You really changed my life in that short year. God bless, sincerely, John Hall. P.S. Don't mind the typos. After all, I majored in history, ha ha." I know it's a little hard to see, but he actually sent me a picture that I could share, and it's up there, so you can maybe take a peek on the way out if you can't see him. Except for the facial hair, it's just the way he looked in 5th grade. So I hope you have a fantastic start to your year. I hope you think of great ways to give awesome academic work to your students and build relationships, and please, please, please go hug your porcupines.
On? Am I on? Am I on? Thank you so much, Mike. Let's have a good year and welcome back. Take care.